Scott Pendlebury from the Collingwood Football Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
This is Patrick Cooch from the Carlton Footy Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Max Gorn, Melbourne Football Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
You're out of the teens and you're getting close to single digits. Number 12 in my 50 most relevant players for SuperCoach, Dream Team and AFL Fantasy. Perennially, this player has been right towards the top of our teams and our ranks for basically a decade. It would not be the 50 most relevant without talking about Zach Merrett. And to do so, a man, you may have seen him stepping away from creating YouTube content over, this pre-season and season proper so far. But we found a way to sneak him out of retirement, just this once. JD, maybe you've seen his videos on YouTube previously, been an absolute superstar of the SuperCoach and the AFL fantasy community. Mate, a pleasure to drag you out of retirement. Are we going full John Farnham style here? Is this the first of many last times, or is this it?
We'll see. I mean, it's a pleasure as always to be a guest, especially on the Coaches Panel. And I said the word retire in, I think, my last video, which is probably bad. I should have said hiatus, which I think is what it more is. And then we'll see if the need, arises to come back if I feel like I can add something to the community again. But I'm happy to take a gap year to really reevaluate my strategies, my processes, learn and grow as an individual. And then we'll see if 2026 brings something different.
You could not have been more Tony Robbins if you tried with that sentiment. I'm here for it, mate. Midfield eligible, this Essendon bomber. He had a seasonal average right up in the territories we know he's delivered for us for the better part of this 10-year period. A 108.8 in AFL fantasy, meaning he is yet again well and truly north of that $1 million marker for you in AFL fantasy and Dream Team. While SuperCoach, a 115.3. I don't know if he gets the love he should from the SuperCoach community. Just sneaks away into that 110, 115 average every single year. Again, $621,000, 100 is what you are forking out to get your hands on this Essendon star. 23 games last year and another game. Just a great year of performances. 145 was his season high score in SuperCoach. Contrast that to the year prior when he had his seasonal high in SuperCoach of 168, while in AFL Fantasy, you're going back to a 149 last year against the eventual premiers. 172, though, is the career high AFL Fantasy score. JD, there's just so much to love about Zach Merrett, and I think it's just because he can be at 50 points at three-quarter time, and as an owner, you're still going, 100 is on the board here. A 120 is still on the board. If you're up against him in a draft, you're like, geez, he needs 70 points in the last quarter. You just don't feel safe because he scores in every column. That high work rate, that athletic and aerobic capacity, the desire to get to multiple contests. And then when he does get the ball, he uses it so well, either himself impacting the scoreboard or setting up his teammates to be able to do something great. Whether you love him or hate him as a footballer, I don't know too many that don't. But I think inside the fantasy footy community, we have just long loved for the decade what Zach Merrett has been and what I think he's going to be for at least the next few years.
Yeah, well, we had the big milestone this year of Pendlebury hitting, 400 games. And honestly, of the active players, he's probably the ones that could be next in line, simply because he hasn't missed since he started playing. He's been ultra durable, playing 229 of a possible 243 games. And that's not where the parallels lie or finish when it comes to him and Pendlebury. I mean, we've fondly called Scott Pendlebury to Pendlebury for the better part of the decade because he's just done it over and over again. And in fact, his record was 10 seasons in a row of 100-plus fantasy games. Zach Merrett's at 9, going for 10 this year. So that kind of speaks to the pedigree and the prowess that he's put together over this period of time. In SuperCoach, he said he doesn't get respect 5 straight years in a row of 110 or more, which is wild. Rare air. It is absolutely wild. So I think you're right. He doesn't get some of the respect he deserves, especially as a starting pick. And we're going to try and shift that today. It's a hard one to do. The blueprint for Zach has really been to, wait for his score to dip a little bit, find that point where he's cheap, and then jump on him. And in SuperCoach, for sure, it's been about that mid-season buy. But last year, he bucked the trend. He actually started off very hot. I think in the first 5 games, he had an average of 127, and in fantasy, it was something similar of a 119. And maybe that could be the case again this year. We've got some stuff to go through as to why Zach Merrett could be a starting pick and maybe deserves to be even higher than 12. Let's just put it out there.
It's absolutely true. Look, 8 straight tons to kick off the year in AFL Fantasy last year. He ended the year with 17. That seasonal average of 108. He's the number 1 mid last year in AFL Fantasy for points, the number 2 for average, and top 10 across AFL Fantasy of all lines for points and average. While in SuperCoach, you mentioned that strong start to the year linked into that format. It was after round 16 before he had a score under 94. So unbelievable scoring to kick off the year. 18 tons, a great conversion rate of 100 to 120 plus score, with 11 of them being 120 plus scores. And again, top 10 mid across the format for overall points and for average, top 7 overall for points. And really the past 5 to 9 years has just been unbelievable with his ceiling. And his basement, we often knock him for just this historical poor scoring where he gets tagged out of games. But JD, I looked since 2021, he's only had 5 AFL fantasy scores under 80 and 6 under 80 in SuperCoach. And so I think we are disrespecting Zach Merrett because we all go, nah, he'll get tagged, he'll bottom out his score. And even if elements of that narrative are true, to have such high scoring ceiling that you mentioned, then relatively low floor in an era of trying to mitigate risk in our starting squads in AFL, Fantasy, SuperCoach and Dream Team. Zach does feel like the kind of player, if you just want an M1 that'll get it done, there's not too many better than him.
Yep, I couldn't disagree more, MJ. If you're looking for the safe option, it's durability, it's scoring history. It's hard to go past that. So, you mentioned that we often will end up with Zach in our teams, but the historical starting percentage of ownership is relatively low because we find a way to get him during the season. But last year, that wasn't the case. Build the case for me for why you should start Zach Merrett, because I just don't think we're thinking about him in that way. It's upgrade target. We'll get him during the year. It'll be fine. What is the case? What is the mindset a fantasy coach should be looking at to say, no, Zach Merrett in my starting squad? Yeah, and look, I think the reason why he's not in more teams is pretty simple. The methodology for how we pick a starting side has very much changed to being value-based. So when you find someone like Zach, who is towards the top end of scoring, is at the top end of scorers last year, it's usually safer to bet against these guys than to try and build a case for why they can improve. But I'm going to convince you otherwise. And it may be with something that people would have as a negative. And that is the preseason training reports that Zach has been training more across half-back. And in fact, in some of the match sims and practice games, he's been playing across there a little bit more as well. Now, you may say, like, JD, this is counterintuitive. We've always gone for the CBA mid, and you're telling me he's going to move away from that and we're going to pick him as a result? Well, this is where the fun comes in. Now, would you like to have a guess at what Zach Merrett's average over the last 3 years is when he has had at least one kick-in those games?
Oh, I'm going 120. I'm just going wild. I feel like you're setting me up here, JD, so I'm going to go bold and 120.
In SuperCoach, that is a 134 average, and in AF, in fantasy, it is 128.
Oh my gosh.
He has absolutely gone nuts in any game where he seems to get behind the ball, and it's easy to see why. When you look at, and shout out to J-Pop, to Jaden, when you look at transition points, time and time again, Zach Merrett's at the top of the list for inside mids. He does unbelievably well in the transition, and it's for the reasons that you've said. He's a beautiful field kick. He's a quick decision maker. In fact, in the draft testing they did back in 2013 or whatever it was drafted, the fastest on the psychometric testing and decision making time and all that type of stuff. So brilliant field kick, great decision maker. And in a side which lacks both of these in spades, honestly, he's really the only one to go to. And if you look at the only players that have really pipped him on transition scoring at all, they're ones that have actually gone across half back. So this is the case for Zach Merrett. He can score even more of these transaction points by being a mid that goes and plays behind the ball rather than trying to play in front of it when he doesn't have it. And I think that is the interesting upside for Merrett. Not only that, Essendon has continued to build out in the midfield, blood these guys. We've got Parrish coming back this year. So you've got rotations that don't necessarily need Zach in there. We've got Sardis potentially coming through to complement Caldwell, to complement Durham, who both had breakouts last year, Parrish coming back, and that means that we can potentially free up Merrett behind the ball. And the experiment last year with Nick Martin definitely didn't win favours with a lot of people, and so I think they're going to move him up the ground. And that does leave opportunity for Zach really to pick up behind that ball and to be a great user of it across the ground. And of course, he's not going to stop there. He's going to be chaining up through the middle. They're going to be looking for him. And this is why we could see a little bit of upside. Now, is it going to be that 134 SuperCoach, that 128 fantasy? Probably not. Probably not. But it is interesting to think about what if.
It's a scary scoring area that of all the players that you want setting up the offensive ball movement for Essendon, surely it's Zach Merrett, the greatest decision maker, the greatest intuitive player that just has a feel of the game. He's the one to do it. And then from an opposition perspective, where do you want to let Zach Merrett get his hands on the ball? Anywhere behind the centre half. Sure, Zach, have your ball. Please don't bring the ball inside forward 50, because if he's the one delivering it, my gosh, now all of a sudden this odds and ends and developing Essendon forward line. And I think that's what it is. It's a young developing forward line. You don't want him doing that if you're an opposition coach, but him behind the ball, yeah, okay. If he's going to get it somewhere, get it there. But for fantasy coaches, my gosh, this scoring from transition, this playmaking space that you have mapped out as an option for us, whew, now I'm interested. Now there's value. And as you've mentioned, now there's a midfield that's not so dependent on him. Are you concerned? I know from an Essendon perspective, what does this team look like structurally now? Because Martin feels like he's more wing, inside mid, high half forward. There has been some talk of Dylan Shield floating back, whether that be in the twos or the ones. It depends which Essendon fan base you try to head towards. You mentioned Sardis and other names in the returning of Parrish. How do you feel like this ball movement, midfield mix and rebounding movement off halfback all kind of structurally looks? Because if we can find that pathway to see what it looks like, well, now we either A, can confirm that statistical line as a viable option for us, or we can at least go, oh no, here's some holes in the Merrett, let alone the Essendon ball movement.
Yeah, I mean, you started that with, are you concerned about Essendon? And the answer is yes. Yes to all of it. As a long-suffering Essendon fan, yes, I'm always concerned. Zach has been often the lone bright spark in this team, and so I look forward to watching him. How does it all come together? I mean, the thing that sticks out to me is we're trialling Shield across half-back, and he has been unable to kick well for about 2 or 3 years, especially on the run. So if that's what the alternative is here at the moment, are you telling me they're not going to just put it through Zach every time he's behind the ball? And I think the thing that sticks out to me maybe more so than anything else is that tag threat that we have worried about. He's become much better at working through that as a midfielder. But in doing so, he's actually added a lot of versatility to his game. So depending on where the tagger comes from, he's been able to push forward and kick goals. He's been able to work on the outside if they're a slower inside contested person. And I think being able to go behind the ball adds another string to it, because we saw with Dacos, where can't you be tagged? It is in the goal square when you're getting those kick-ins. So I think it's actually a really promising thing for me. How our structure works out and how he fits into it, that's anyone's guess at the moment. I'm waiting for the match teams. I feel like I had a much better read on it this time last year with what we were doing with Nick Martin. It made a lot more sense. How we fiddle around with Shield, Martin, and Merrett this year, I think, is still to be seen. But if Shield is meant to be the answer to our distribution behind halfback, I think we're going to be seeing a lot more of Merrett behind there.
What's your read on how this midfield dynamic will work with a fit and healthy Darcy Parish at times over the past few years? His scoring splits with and without have seen a little bit of differential. He really feels like the one that could unlock that ball movement behind and Zach playing that step behind players. Have you got a thought about Parish and Merrett and how this midfield mix might all come together?
Yes. So how the midfield mix comes together, I'm still a little bit unsure about. I think that's something I'm still waiting to see myself. But I think the interesting thing about Parish coming back, there's probably twofold. So firstly, last year with Parish in the midfield, Merrett was able to score a little bit better in both SuperCoach and Fantasy. So 117 in SuperCoach with him, 113 without, and then in Fantasy, 111 with Parish and 106 without. So slight scoring improvements with him back in the side. And I think it's easy to understand why. I was trying desperately in the last half hour to find this before we started recording. It was from Liam Crow, and I think it was on his original Twitter account that's gone. But he was looking at players that shared the ball most, like where scoring sources came from in the chain. And I think right up there in the top 2 or 3 was Parish and Merrett. I can't remember if there's 23, 24, just have to take my word for it. The chart doesn't exist anymore. But Merrett benefited from Parish winning it on the inside and then getting it to him on the outside, which is where he does his damage. And I think that's part of what was lost last year, because even when Parish was playing, he wasn't particularly great on the inside. Just had quite an average year hampered by injuries. So if we see him coming back, even when Merrett is up on the ball and playing that role, having Parish in there to actually be at the coal face, get the first possession and get it out to Zach is exactly what we're going to be looking for. And I think that once again provides that little bit of opportunity for some scoring that didn't happen this year.
Philosophy or thought around premiums in the early season buys. It's the first year we've now got intellectual data and learnings from last year. We're all just flying blind, building philosophies, ideologies, and strategies without knowing exactly what it would be. We venture into a new year now with at least some element of historical data points, whether they are helpful or hindrant. You can be the judge on that. But Essendon do have the final of the early buys. They have that in round 4 before gather round. Do you have a philosophy or a mindset around premiums and whether or not you fade or can still pick them if they do have an early season buy?
Yeah, so look, obviously this is a very pro Zach Merrett podcast, and we will not say anything to besmirch the individual. So whatever I'm about to say on premiums and starting buys does not apply to him. It applies to all your other premiums, but not Zach Merrett.
Got it.
Look, so when I've looked at this, I think I take probably about 3 to 4 points and put it on top of what the average is that I require from them. If they've got that early buy, and that's about the benchmark. So it's not a no, but they have to outperform what they're priced at or what you need them to be priced at by just that little bit more than other players. And that would be more so if it was a very popular buy. I think luckily Essendon's is shared with Forks, and realistically there's not too many options across these, so you might be able to get away with it without having to put 3 or 4 points on it. But in general, that makes a player like Zach even harder to start. They're already fully priced. The case for upside isn't necessarily there. And then to put that extra hurdle on top of it rules these guys out, which is unfortunate. But of course not for Zach, because that kick-in stat is of course real. He's like 10 points underpriced. So you can still go for sure. Like, yeah, just ignore the don't start premium.
Everyone but Zach
doesn't apply.
That flag of overperformance. Everyone but Zach. That will be the hashtag that we will find a way to get into on social media around this. Everyone but Zach, when we make a negative reflection on that. Historically, there's always been a 2 to 3 week moment where he doesn't have bad scores. And I'll refer to a bad score as anything really under 80. But there's a bunch of high 80s and 90s where he just doesn't get to that triple figure market. And then there's this whack of games that he just goes on a stretch of 8 to 10. We saw it at the start of last year, that early run across the formats, then a middle portion to the latter 2/3 of the year. That's where the slow part is. You go back through previous eras and years. It's a little bit different. So if you're choosing not to start Zach, is there an area of the game where you are looking at some of the fixtures going, This, as best as I can forecast, feels like the time that the hot stretch could start. Because if you can get Zach at the hot stretch, whether it's at the start of the year and he outperforms and delivers what is suggested, or we pick the timing right and get him at a slightly discounted price point in comparison to what he's about to deliver. Timing feels like everything about when you're going to get on Zach Merrett this year.
Yeah, and look, it's always hard when picking timing, especially for some of these top premium guys, because someone like Zach, there is some difference in wins and losses, but not a ton. So you can try and pick a part in the schedule where it looks like it's going to be harder for Essendon and target that. That's one way of doing it. Another way would be to look at, well, what are the teams that are more restrictive on transition scoring, and try and find a patch where he's going to be against some of those more restrictive teams, and then try and jump on him afterwards. And looking at the fixture, it might actually line up for us pretty early. This is something we were talking about beforehand, where if you look at round 0 against Gold Coast, easy matchup, but we don't get that, right? We get the points in the rolling average, but not in our teams. And then Hawks finished very hot last year, one of the hardest teams to score at over the end. So that's round 1. So you could see a poorer score off the bat there. Round 2 against the Crows is probably an all right matchup. And then round 3 against Port, that is one that is going to be more difficult, just based on what they were doing last year. So these first 3 games after the Gold Coast one, pretty tough. And then bye, rest, relax. And then we look at what happens after that. Melbourne, West Coast, Collingwood, North. It's almost like a who's who's. We're just missing Richmond for lining up teams that allowed big scores to mids, especially on transition. And look, some of these teams will improve year on year. I can see Melbourne bouncing back. I can see West Coast improving. I can see Collingwood bouncing back. I should see North improve again. But is it enough that these are no longer big green matchups? Probably not. So if you don't start with Zach, which of course foolish, looking at him as a post-round 4 buy option as early as that, a first upgrade, or maybe jumping off an injured player or someone that hasn't performed as well, it could be as early as then that we try and jump on him for a purple patch.
Well, I really like that time. And what an aggressive move. We know that those early aggressive moves in all of your fantasy formats, when they're bold and big and strong and they pay off, this is where the separation comes. People will look at that Port Adelaide matchup and go, oh, but that bad score hasn't rolled out of his average to the space that I want yet. So he's not going to bottom out in price. So I'll just wait till he gets to the North Melbourne matchup. Well, by then the damage could be done. And any worry about price point is all and suddenly gone, and he goes 130, 140 over that 3-4 week stretch. So I love the ideology of being bold in your trades early. We're seeing that more and more, that if you don't be aggressive early and react ahead of the pack, I know, JD, you've done really well across the formats over a number of years. That quick ability to turn and to adjust fast. If you are slow, you'll rank okay, but you'll never get yourself in a position to win.
Yes, I can't disagree with any of that. I have done really well. Sorry, as soon as you started talking about me, I just zoned out from the rest of it. You're spot on. I tweeted something a little bit early in the preseason around it's all about identifying change, and those that can identify it well are the ones that succeed time and time again. And I think that's going to be very much what Zach Merrett season's all about. Is this role change real? Is there the change in there that could lead to some potential upside? If not, well, what are those patches during the year where something changes, whether it's the opposition, whether it's what Essendon's doing, that gives him the ability to go from 100, 105 average up to the 115, 120 that we can see in patches. And that is why Zach Merrett is absolutely going to be relevant this year, because it doesn't matter if you start him, which you should. We're just, absolutely. He's going to be relevant at some point in the year. And that's what's made him so relevant over every year since he started, is there's been that one point in the year where you should be jumping on and owning him. And if you don't, you get left behind. So even if you're not going to start him, you should be watching him every single week.
100%. I don't think I've done a 50 most relevant without Zach, and I don't see myself changing from that anytime soon. Much like I don't think many have ended a season without having Zach in their team at one point in time. And I, again, very much see that being the pathway for 2025. The question is start or upgrade, not whether or not I will own him at any point or junction during the season. But on draft day, it all goes down to just one coach that gets to own him. Here at the Coaches Panel, we choose to draft on the Keeper platform. It has unrivaled customizations. Whether you want to do a single season, a dynasty, or a keeper league, the Keeper platform allows you to do all that, and everything can be done inside the platform. No more spreadsheets, no more trying to figure things out. If you can dream it, Keeper lets you do it. And probably what you'd love to be able to do is clone Zach Merrett. That's probably one thing they won't let you do on the Keeper platform, so multiple people could pick him on draft day. He undoubtedly is an M1 to me, JD. I'm not too sure many people would take him out of their first tier of midfielders, but when do you choose to pull the trigger and draft Zach Merrett is probably the big question, because I don't think his range of outcomes is all that wild, but those early round or two, a lot can change on draft day.
Yes, well, if we're cloning Zach Merrett, sign Essendon up, because we need about 3 more of him if we're going to win a final anytime soon. In terms of where you should be drafting him, look, my philosophy for drafting in the first round is it's not so much about whether you win your league with that pick, but it's definitely an opportunity to lose it. And that's where I'd be trying to avoid guys that may do really well for positional scarcity, but have an injury history or durability or inconsistent scoring. And none of that is Zach Merrett. Zach Merrett is the poster child for someone that you know is going to be a walk-up, 110 for the year, durable, consistent week in, week out, and a captain option. So is he going to be the first couple off the board? Probably not. That's going to be reserved for your Cherries, your Sheezels. But I think shortly after them, Zach Merrett's got to be in consideration, especially if you're looking for a safe pick to anchor your side for 2025.
100%. I still think he'll be one of the first mids off the board in an AFL fantasy scoring platform. He might be third or fourth behind the likes of the Butters and Bont in a SuperCoach platform, but he's not getting out of the early part of the second round. That is as late as he is falling. And again, it all depends on positional scarcity that people choose to draft into those spaces that JD's mentioned. Really becomes the only reason he drops much out of the first round, if at all. Hey, mate, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Love talking fantasy footy with you. I know you're taking we'll use the right word, hiatus from content creation at the moment, but you are quite active, thank you, on social media. Where can people get in touch with you on X? I know you're posting all the time.
Yes, just at Jackson Davey. It's like my posts kind of alternate between like serious, something useful about strategy or a player, and just like trolling and memes. So if you're into that, come join me, come find me. We can have a laugh throughout the year. Hopefully it'll be a good one.
Yeah, no, I'm sure it will be. We've put that inside the description of this episode too. So if you want to go and get in on the little bit of the fun banter, as well as the great strategy insights from a guy that has done well across the formats multiple years in a row, definitely want to make sure you pick his brain and insights. One of the sharpest minds going around in the fantasy footy landscape, that is for sure. In a moment, I've got a clue for you about who's at number 11. Let's see how you go with guessing this player. But if you are just a little bit behind on the 50 most relevant, and I don't blame you if you are, because listening to 50 podcasts of my voice in 50 days in a row is impressive. There is one that I know is running every day. He sends us a message every day going, I know how long I'm running today based on how long your podcast is going for. So look, if that's how it's helping you get through the 50, then well done to you. But if you are just catching up, you can go and check us out wherever you get audio podcasts. Just search for the Coaches Panel, subscribe, and give us a 5-star rating over there. We are putting these episodes out on YouTube. And if you are watching on YouTube, hello, nice to see you. Subscribe and comment below. What do you think Zach's going to average this year? And of course, inside the details of the description, the chance to get in touch with JD, join our social media, get access to our Patreon, and get your hands on some Coaches Panel merch. All right, you ready? I'm getting out of clues. Let's see how you go with guessing who's at number 11. This guy, I've only heard just one good reason to fade him. Because for most people, we go, I could build 2 or 3 pretty compelling reasons. It's a poor injury narrative. It's the bye. It's a positional element. We can stack up a couple of reasons against most players. But when you tune in tomorrow, this clue will make a lot more sense. I can only hear one valid reason that someone says, I'm not starting person X for this reason. Outside of that, I have to ask why. And is that one reason a good enough reason to fade him? Because there is a strong world where this guy is the number 1 player across all competitions in 2025. Who is he? You'll find out tomorrow in the 50 Most Relevant.